This story was narrated by VidCrew Media. Please show your support by like and subscribe. Thank you. Despite facing more than 10 men, Jared was calmly seated and barely moved a muscle. Suddenly, he grabbed some peanuts from the table, flung them out in their direction. When the men saw Jared throwing peanuts at them, they made a face and didn't bother to dodge, assuming that the peanuts were harmless. But soon, all of them regretted it at once. Upon impact, they felt as if they were hit by bullets instead. One by one, they trembled momentarily before collapsing onto the ground. Every one of them had a cut on their hands where blood began to flow out. Rhino was stunned by what happened, as if he was spellbound. He watched as his subordinates were all howling in pain. What happened? Rhino gulped nervously. No one answered him, and even Yolanda was stupefied. After all, she had not expected Jared to be so powerful. Turning around, she gave Hilda a look, as she felt that she deserved an explanation about who Jared really was. At that moment, even Hilda was taken aback. She never knew Jared was capable of taking down more than 10 men with just peanuts. It was simply unfathomable. Staring at Rhino, Jared questioned, "Are you still planning to kill me?" Just when he attempted to answer, words just wouldn't come out after he saw the look on Jared's face. In fact, it took him a while before he regained his senses. After taking a few deep breaths to calm down, he replied, "Kid, I got to admit that you know a thing or two. But do you know who I am? I'm a member of the Crimson Dragon Gang, and this street belongs to us. Now that you have hit me, you have made enemies with the entire gang. So what if I did? If you're so tough, why don't all of you just come at me?" Jared couldn't help but sneer. With his face fuming red, Rhino took out his phone and made a call. Even though no one knew who he was calling, they were certain it was for reinforcements. Soon, Rhino broke out into a smug smile after the call had ended. "Kid, now that Mr. Lawson is coming, you're doomed. Even if you have 9 lives, there's no way you're going to escape." Rhino had called Felix. With Steven away, Felix was left in charge of the Crimson Dragon Gang in his stead. Now that there was an issue, Felix was the man Rhino was supposed to escalate to. The mention of Felix's name caused Jared to break into laughter. After all, he had just left Felix's office and didn't expect to see him again so soon. "Perfect. I'll be right here waiting. Let's see how this Mr. Lawson that you talk about will do to me," Jared remarked with contempt. However, the mere mention of Felix caused Yolanda's face to turn pale. After giving Hilda a look, she whispered in her ear, "Hilda, you should persuade Jared to leave now, instead of maintaining this bravado. Let me tell you, Mr. Lawson is a lieutenant of Steven, head of the Crimson Dragon Gang. He is so ruthless that Jared would definitely lose his life if he comes later." Frightened by the prospect, Hilda nodded slightly. Then she approached Jared and muttered, "Jared, we'd better go. It's getting late." Hilda didn't reveal to Jared how powerful Felix was, as she was cognizant of his overinflated ego. If she had been frank, Jared would never want to leave. After glancing at Yolanda, Jared turned his attention to Hilda and suggested, "Hilda, you and Yolanda should go first. I'll be leaving in a short while." Jared's refusal to leave simply intensified Hilda's worries. Thus, she had no choice but to speak the truth. "Jared, Yolanda just told me that Mr. Lawson is very strong. Hence, it's better if we don't challenge him." "Don't worry, I'm not afraid." Jared smiled faintly. When Yolanda saw how stubborn Jared was, she had no choice but to admonish him aloud. "Don't assume that you are invincible just because you know a thing or two. Mr. Lawson is a key lieutenant of the leader of the Crimson Dragon Gang, and he is an extremely skilled fighter. In fact, even if there were 2 or 3 of you, you would still be no match for him. Therefore, do you still want to stay back? What's there to be scared of?" Jared responded with nonchalance. Yolanda almost exploded. Finally, desperately pulled Hilda along with her. "Hilda, let's just leave him and go. Given that he has offended the Crimson Dragon Gang, there's no way he will survive to see tomorrow. It's not worth it for us to be dragged down with him." With that, Yolanda forcefully towed Hilda away. Even though Rhino didn't want to let them go, he didn't dare to utter a single word of protest, as he was worried about being assaulted by Jared again. Not long after the ladies were gone, a few cars came speeding in and screeched to a halt in front of the stall they were at. When the owner saw what was going on, he fled into his cabin in fear. At the same time, the other patrons began to flee. Only those who were brave enough stayed back to watch from afar. Everyone knew of Felix's terrifying reputation. Therefore, no one dared to offend him for fear of losing their lives. At the sight of the cars, Rhino hurried forward to open the car door in a sycophantic manner. Chomping a cigar in his mouth, Felix alighted from the car. The authority he exuded awed the onlooking crowd. Facing Felix with a remorseful expression, Rhino greeted loudly, "Mr. Lawson." "Rhino, look at you. You're nothing but a disgrace." Looking at Rhino's miserable expression, Felix furrowed his brows. "Where's the troublemaker?" "Mr. Lawson, he's sitting right there." Rhino pointed at Jared. As Felix's gaze trailed the trajectory of Rhino's finger, his body shivered at the sight of Jared, causing the cigar he was smoking to drop onto the ground. When he saw how petrified Felix was, Rhino was stunned. He quickly picked up the cigar and explained, "Mr. Lawson, he's just one man, but has some decent skills. In fact, he had even defeated all of my men." At that moment, Felix was so enraged that he wanted to give Rhino a piece of his mind. Jared doesn't just have some decent skills. He is actually so strong that Stephen was defeated with just a kick. Consequently, there's no one in Horrington who could fight him at all. "Mr. Lawson." At that moment, Jared looked at Felix in a mischievous manner. "Looks like fate has brought us together again." In response, Felix broke into a servile smile and walked up to Jared. "Mr. Chance, I'm sure you're just joking. Looks like it's my fault for not disciplining my men again." At that moment, Rhino was shocked. With a bewildered expression, he looked in Felix's direction. "Your subordinate claimed that I wouldn't be leaving this place alive, even if I had 9 lives," Jared related with a smirk. "That's impossible. With your skills, no one in Horrington can stop you." Felix smiled awkwardly before turning to Rhino. "Rhino, get your ass over here." Astounded, Rhino had no choice but to trudge forward as instructed. "Get down on your fucking knees and apologize to Mr. Chance." Felix landed a kick on Rhino. Thud. With that, Rhino dropped to his knees in front of Jared. "Enough, you can drop the act. Before Stephen comes back with his master, I won't do anything to your gang, unless if you get on my nerves." Jared was well aware that Felix was just pretending to be respectful. After all, he had become the Crimson Dragon gang's mortal enemy ever since he defeated Stephen. Therefore, there was no way Felix would sincerely respect him. Just as he finished, Jared got up to leave. A cold glint glistened in Felix's eye as he watched Jared's silhouette disappear. "Mr. Lawson, who is he?" Rhino asked curiously as he got back to his feet after Jared left. Slap. Suddenly, Felix responded with a forceful slap. "Let me warn you, the next time you see him, please stay as far as you can away from him. He was the one who defeated Stephen. Hence, you should be counting your lucky stars for not losing your life today." With that, Felix left with his men, leaving Rhino behind trying to recover from the shock. Meanwhile, back in their neighborhood, Hilda waited anxiously for Jared. As for Yolanda, she had left after sending Hilda home. "Hilda, why aren't you going in? Who are you waiting for?" Chloe asked when she saw Hilda loitering outside. "Mom, you should go in first." "I'm waiting for Jared," Hilda replied with an anxious expression. "What happened to Jared? Why didn't both of you come home together?" Chloe asked when she saw how worried Hilda was. Hilda was suddenly tongue-tied, as she didn't know how to explain to her mother. "Hilda, where's Jared? Aren't you both supposed to come back together?" At that moment, Hannah and Gary came out of the house. When she saw Jared's parents, Hilda didn't want them to worry. Hence, she quickly made an excuse. "He's busy with work, so he will be a little late." "What is he doing? It's already past office hours. How can there be so much work to do?" Hannah grumbled. "Mrs. Chance, you should go back in first. I can wait for him here." Hilda urged them to go back in, as she didn't know when Jared would be back, or if he could even make it home. "We were planning to give both of you a surprise, but Jared still isn't back. Even though it is so late, Hannah commented with a sigh. Surprise! Hilda was stunned. Chloe quickly explained, since taking public transport to work is inconvenient for both of you, Mr. Chance has bought a car to make your lives easier. We plan to surprise Jared, but he is still not back. Mrs. Wallace, you paid for the car too. Therefore, it's considered a gift from both families to the children, Hannah added right away. I only contributed a few thousand, which isn't significant. You guys paid for all the rest, Chloe commented with a smile. This car is for both of them to start off. Once they have settled into their jobs, they can buy their own. Now that we're old, this is all the help we can give, Gary explained. That's very true. Going forward, we will have to rely on both of them, Chloe agreed with a nod. Having heard their conversation, Hilda blushed in response. It felt as if both parents were treating them as a couple, which was something Hilda didn't object to. After spending a lot of time with Jared recently, Hilda noticed that she had developed feelings for him. Unfortunately, she had no idea where Jared stood in their relationship. It's getting late. What are you chatting about out here? At that moment, Jared approached them with a smiling face. Jared. Upon his return, Hilda rushed up to him and scrutinized him for any injuries. With Chloe and Gary saw her reaction, both of them broke into a smile. Only Hannah sighed. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I can see both of them get married with my own eyes? When Jared heard the comment, he felt the urge to explain that he only saw Hilda as a sister. However, underneath everyone's hopeful gazes, he couldn't bring himself to say it. Mom, don't worry. I will definitely find a cure for your eyes, Jared reassured her, instead of clarifying their misunderstanding. There's no need to worry about me, as I'm used to it. Both of you should focus on your jobs. Once you have saved up enough, you can buy a matrimonial home and a car. As for me and your dad, there's nothing more we can do to help, Hannah commented with a guilty tone. Given that Jared wasn't married yet, she felt bad that Gary and she couldn't financially support Jared any further. Hannah, don't say that. Their happiness is all that matters. After all, I don't need anything at my end. Chloe patted Hannah on the shoulder. Despite being filled with mixed emotions when he heard those words, Jared still didn't know how to break the news to them. Jared, Mr. Chance has bought you a car. We can drive together to work from tomorrow onward, Hilda informed Jared, in order to change the subject. After all, their parents were getting ahead of themselves by discussing their marriage. Since they weren't even in an official relationship yet, such talk was simply too early. Jared, your dad spent the whole day outside just to get you this car. Although it isn't much, it's certainly more comfortable than taking public transport, Chloe added. After walking downstairs together, Jared and Hilda saw a white Ford parked there. At first glance, one could tell right away that it wasn't a new car. Jared, this is a second-hand Ford. Nevertheless, the mileage is still low, and there was only one previous owner. Also, it's in pretty good condition and only costs $40,000. Hence, I bought it for you. That's the best I can do, Gary explained with an apologetic expression. Gary's words tugged at Jared's heartstrings. Dad, it's a great car. Now that I can make a living, there's nothing for you to worry about anymore. We're glad to see you finally have a good job. As long as you work hard, you will definitely afford everything you want in the future, Gary encouraged Jared with a nod. However, Jared was planning to quit his job after a few days, as it was getting in the way of his training. But now, he had to put the idea on the back burner until he could reassure his parents about it. The next day, when Jared drove the second-hand Ford to work, he was expectedly ridiculed by his colleagues. Nevertheless, he didn't mind it at all. As for Hilda, she too didn't care about what others said. At that moment, the thought of being able to travel to and fro from work together with Jared felt blissful to her. Just when they arrived at the office, Zane came over and ordered, Jared, you'll have to collect all the debts today, or you'll be fired. Zane hated Jared to the core, especially after what happened the night before. Not only did Jared hit him in public, but he humiliated him too. Hence, there was no way he would forgive Jared. After staring coldly at Zane, Jared simply ignored him. Instead, Hilda became nervous about it. Mr. Carlson, There are so many of them. How is it possible that Jared recover them all? Aren't you just making things difficult for him? Although Jared didn't say a word, Hilda felt indignant at Zane's demand. Why? Do you want to collect the debts together with him? In that case, I'll put both of you on the same team. If you can't complete them by today, both of you will be fired, Zane suddenly declared after Hilda challenged him. Suddenly, Troy raised his hand and suggested, Mr. Carlson, I want to change teams. It was obvious to him that Zane was targeting Jared on purpose, especially after Jared disrespected Xavier. Therefore, he felt that he would be dragged down by Jared if he remained on the same team as him. Fine, Hilda and you will switch. Zane nodded in agreement. This time, Maria no longer stood up for Hilda, despite watching what happened. After all, Jared had hit Zane the day before, upsetting her. Moreover, he had also stepped on Xavier's toes, which was as good as ending his career. After Zane returned to his office, Troy quickly packed his things and moved, as if he was avoiding the plague. Looking at how Troy reacted, Jared let out a smirk. He had initially planned to promote Troy, as he had a good impression of him. All he needed was to say the word. After all, Josephine wouldn't interfere. But now, Jared no longer felt the urge to do so. Perhaps this is what the corporate world is like. It's every man for himself indeed. Jared, what are we going to do? Hilda asked helplessly. Given how elated their parents were when they found the job, they would be equally devastated if they lost it. Don't worry, the debts will be quickly paid into our company account, Jared reassured Hilda. However, Hilda remained unconvinced. The bosses of those companies were not going to pay up on their own accord, unless there was something wrong with their heads. Hilda, why did you have to get involved? I'm afraid that even you will be fired now. Considering your qualities, you can have any man you want. Hence, you should break up with Jared. And I'll introduce a rich guy to you, Lydia suggested as she walked over to Hilda. Instead of saying anything, Hilda just shook her head. She didn't want to leave Jared even if she was to be fired. What a foolish gal you are, Lydia commented with a wry smile. Josephine had wanted to persuade Hilda too, but felt that there was no point in doing so. After all, she knew that it would be Jared and Hilda's last day at work. They are going to be fired after 2 days at work. This has never happened in the company before. That's right. I have never seen such an impudent employee who dared to hit his manager. He really deserves it. Why the need to act tough? If he's really so capable, would he even be working here? Members of the sales department ridiculed Jared incessantly. Amidst the crowd's gossips, someone from the finance department suddenly rushed in. Silas, what brings you to the sales department? Is there something wrong with the accounts? Maria asked. Maria, the sales department has done an awesome job. Right after I came to work, I saw all our customers settle their debts with us. Therefore, there are no outstanding amounts right now. Who's the one in charge of it? It's just unbelievable. Silas explained excitedly to Maria. What? All the debts have been collected? Maria was stunned. Her other colleagues gradually stood up and looked at Silas in disbelief. Silas, is there a mistake? Can such huge sums really be paid? Lydia asked with an incredulous tone. Feeling curious, Silas threw the question back at her. Why would I lie? Anyway, your department is responsible for collecting the debts. Now that they have been settled, how can you not know about it? Oh, of course, I do. Naturally. It was our manager who managed to collect all the arrears, Maria answered hastily, as she abruptly jolted back to her senses. I've naturally got to give the credit for such a windfall to Zane. Who knows, he may be promoted to the position of manager of the acquisition department this time. In that case, Mr. Carlson is really capable. Silas flashed them a smile before adding, we'll talk next time. I've got to go through the accounts with Mr. Carlson. He then entered Zane's office. Meanwhile, everyone in the sales department went into an uproar. Whoa, who's so competent to have collected all the arrears? That's simply incredible. Those arrears are all accumulated from a few years ago and were exceedingly difficult to collect. Could it be Jared? Judging from his confident expression today, he seemed to have known that the arrears would definitely be repaid in full. Nonsense. Could someone like him have collected all the arrears? Didn't you hear that it was the respective companies themselves who voluntarily repaid their debts? It has nothing to do with him whatsoever. Speaking of that, he's really lucky. It looks like he won't be sacked today, after all. The employees of the sales department gathered together and gossiped among themselves. This is great, Jared. We won't be dismissed, Hilda said to Jared excitedly. Didn't I tell you from the very beginning that you didn't have to worry? Jared chuckled softly. How did you know that the arrears would all be paid today? Hilda queried, regarding Jared curiously. It's a secret. Jared smiled without telling her anything. He didn't want her to know everything right then, though he would be telling her the truth sooner or later. While the employees of the sales department were still whispering among themselves, Zane walked out of his office with Silas, who was from the finance department. At the sight of the man, everyone went silent. Zane cast a chilly look in Jared's direction before he stalked away. Right that moment, Xavier was sitting at his desk in the general manager's office with a grim expression on his face. He still had a band-aid on his neck, covering the cut from the night before. Worse still, a palm print was still vaguely visible on his face. Knock, knock. A knock sounded on the door, upon which Xavier coldly snapped, "Come in." "You asked for me, Mr. Jennings," Zane inquired deferentially as soon as he stepped in the door. No sooner had his words fallen than he froze, for he had glimpsed faint marks that were obviously the aftermath of a slap on the man's face. Noticing his stare, Xavier frowned slightly. "Are you enjoying the view?" As his words rang out, Zane was so petrified that he shuddered and hurriedly lowered his head, not daring to utter a single word in response. "Was it you who handed the task of collecting the sales department's arrears to Jared?" Xavier demanded. Zane couldn't quite understand the man's meaning, so he could only nod. "Yes, I just wanted him to hit a brick wall and to take him down a peg. But I never expected him to be so lucky that all the companies owing us a debt actually paid up today." At that, Xavier sneered. "I know why all the arrears were paid out of the blue. Josephine must have given him a hand secretly. Otherwise, he couldn't have possibly done it alone, no matter how capable he is." Nevertheless, he was the only person in the company who knew about Jared and Josephine's relationship. Henceforth, have him handle the negotiation for the collaboration with Cosmic Chemical, he said to Zane, while scanning through some information about the company's collaboration partners in his hand. Hearing that, Zane was stunned for a moment. Cosmic Chemical. Mr. Jennings, Cosmic Chemical is a major client, and the Scott family has been eyeing them as well. Will it offend them to have Jared handle the negotiation and lead to them thinking that we're insincere? He couldn't figure out why Xavier wanted to give such an important client to Jared. After all, the sales department would receive a king's ransom in commission if such a client were to sign a collaboration agreement with the company. "Why are you questioning my decision?" Xavier's eyes narrowed a fraction. "Of course not. I'll do as you ordered, Mr. Jennings." Zane naturally didn't dare go against Xavier, since the latter was his immediate superior. When he had left, Xavier slowly picked up his phone and made a call. "It's done, Mr. Scott. I'll be sending Jared to discuss the collaboration with Cosmic Chemical." "Ha, great job. Do as I say, and I'll give you double the amount the Sullivan family is paying you." A burst of gleeful laughter came from the other end of the phone, and the person hung up right after he had finished speaking. The person Xavier phoned was none other than Leighton. Not only was he aware of the grudge between Jared and Leighton, but he knew that the former's girlfriend had been snatched away by the latter. In Horrington, the power and influence of the Sullivan and Scott families were equal. Besides that, they were also rivals. The Scott family had once tried to poach him by offering him an exorbitant salary, but he had feelings for Josephine and wanted to date her, so he declined. But after the failure of the assassination attempt on Jared last night, and having suffered a slap instead, his fury skyrocketed, and he contacted Leighton. It was actually Leighton's idea to have Jared handle the negotiation of the collaboration with Cosmic Chemical, and his goal was to humiliate the man. After all, an insignificant sales representative like Jared couldn't possibly clinch a huge client. such as Cosmic Chemical. All Leighton would have to do then was personally pay Cosmic Chemical a visit and heap insults on him. Presently, Leighton was still recuperating in a hospital room in Horrington. There's no need to be over the moon just because of such a trivial matter. Lee, Jared isn't worthy of having you target him so deliberately. He's just an ant to you and is nothing at all without Josephine's protection. Sandy crowed in delight when she saw Leighton's jubilation. He broke my arm, so I naturally have to answer the challenge. I want to make his life a living hell and torture him slowly. The corners of Leighton's mouth lifted slightly, and his eyes brimmed with menace. Lee, you're not his match since he has some fighting skills. Besides, Tommy isn't the least bit reliable. I think you'll have to employ a few other martial arts experts if you want to take him down, Sandy suggested. Don't worry. I've already sent someone to contact the Crimson Dragon Gang. Tommy's Templar Regiment isn't the only organization in the whole of Horrington. Crimson Dragon Gang is just as illustrious as Templar Regiment, so it's more than sufficient to deal with him. Leighton knew full well that he wasn't Jared's match, and it wouldn't do him any good to seek Tommy out either. For that reason, he had someone contact the Crimson Dragon Gang. While the Scott family was exceedingly powerful in Horrington, they were just involved in business dealings. They weren't all that familiar with gangs such as the Crimson Dragon Gang, which was why they needed a middleman to facilitate a meeting. Lee, I'd also like to go for the negotiation of the collaboration when the time comes. I want to see how pathetic Jared would look then. He dared to act all high and mighty with Josephine backing him up back then. So I want to see whether he can still maintain his domineering demeanor now. Sandy teetered on the verge of flipping her lid whenever she recalled how Jared humiliated her back then. Sure. Just watch as I crush him under my foot. Leighton guffawed triumphantly. At the sales department, Zane really couldn't fathom why Xavier would give Jared such an important client. However, he had no choice but to execute the man's order when he had said as much. Jared, you're lucky that all the arrears were suddenly repaid in full. However, as a qualified sales representative, not only do you have to be able to collect arrears, but also negotiate collaborations. Therefore, you've got to learn to do so. And according to the rules, you cut the crap and just spit it out. Jared barked impatiently. He was probably the only person who dared speak to Zane in such a manner. Zane's expression darkened when he heard that, and he almost burst a blood vessel. Yet, he didn't dare fire the man without a valid reason, since he wasn't sure what Xavier's plan was. The company has decided to put you in charge of negotiating the collaboration with Cosmic Chemical. Cosmic Chemical is considered the biggest company in the cosmetics industry in Horrington, so if you manage to clinch the collaboration, the commission will be a sum beyond your imagination. However, if you ruin things, stop yakking. Give me the information. Impatience was written all over Jared's face. He's just blathering away because he's jealous of me and wants to humiliate me. With a frosty expression, Zane tossed the folder containing the relevant information to Jared. HMPH. This time, I'll definitely figure out some way to give you the boot. How dare you act so arrogantly with me? He inwardly swore even as he gritted his teeth. What's the meaning of this, Zane? I've been the one negotiating the collaboration with Cosmic Chemical. Do you know how long I've been at it? Why did you give it to him all of a sudden? Maria roared at Zane as she panicked. Everyone knew that Cosmic Chemical was a huge client, and the commission would certainly be a pretty penny if one managed to secure the collaboration. That was why Zane gave the project to Maria from the start. Considering their relationship, no one in the sales department dared to have any objections. Furthermore, Zane had made several trips to Cosmic Chemical's office with Maria for the sake of the collaboration, and Maria had been working particularly hard. Thus, it was only natural that she was apoplectic when the client was abruptly given to Jared then. Zane tugged her aside and whispered, "Don't kick up a fuss first. I'll explain things to you later." After saying that, he turned to Jared and declared, "This is the company's most important client, so you've got to settle it as soon as possible, Jared. As such, give me a specific time frame as to when you can clinch the deal." "Tomorrow, I guess." Jared initially wanted to say that afternoon, But on second thought, he still needed to inform Tommy and make the arrangements beforehand. So he said tomorrow instead. Tomorrow. Zane was knocked sideways. In fact, everyone in the sales department was staggered. They all gaped at Jared in utter disbelief. You must have lost your mind. Huh, Jared, this is Cosmic Chemical we're talking about. Yet, you're saying that you can secure the collaboration by tomorrow. Lydia scoffed with contempt etched on her face, even as she gave a bark of laughter. Can you please stop bragging, Jared? Do you know how long I've spent on this client? 3 months. I didn't manage to finalize the collaboration even after 3 months. But you're saying you can secure it tomorrow. Maria shot daggers at Jared. Ugh, he's simply humiliating me by saying such a thing. I didn't manage to clinch the collaboration after 3 months. But he's claiming that he can do it within a day. Isn't he just deriding me for my incompetence? When Zane saw Jared's pompousness, he sneered. You said it yourself, so you'd better pack your bags. If you fail to do so, Jared, the sales department doesn't need someone who loves to talk big. Okay, Jared agreed readily. Following that, elation deluged Zane like a tidal wave, for he knew that the man couldn't possibly secure the collaboration the following day. If it were that easy, he wouldn't have accompanied Maria in, making trip after trip for 3 whole months. Besides, the Scott family also had its eye on Cosmic Chemical, so it was definitely no piece of cake. He then pulled Maria into his office to explain things to her. The other employees in the sales department eyed Jared disdainfully before they all dispersed as well. After getting the information, Jared didn't even bother flipping through it, but sent it to Tommy instead. Hilda, however, was anxious and pored over the details about Cosmic Chemical the entire day. Hilda, you've got a class reunion tonight, so you should pack up, since it's about time to get off work now. Don't scrutinize the information anymore, Jared finally urged, seeing that Hilda had been studying the information about Cosmic Chemical incessantly with a worried expression on her face. Jared, Cosmic Chemical is really difficult to convince. Its general manager is an extremely obstinate person. How are we going to sway him over to collaborate with us tomorrow? Hilda was no longer in the mood to attend her class reunion. After all, Jared would be shown the door if they couldn't clinch the collaboration tomorrow. And if that happened, she didn't want to continue working here either. Do you not trust me? I said it'll be fine. So it's a done deal. Don't worry. Jared stared right into her eyes. Gazing into Jared's unwavering eyes, Hilda nodded at long last. I trust you. Jared flashed her a smile and patted her head gently, his gaze emanating brotherly love. Mere moments after it was time to get off work, Hilda received a call from Yolanda, who urged her to hurry up as many of their former classmates had already arrived. She then asked her friend for the location, only to be told that the class reunion was being held at Glamour Hotel. When Hilda heard that, she wavered slightly. They were planning to split the bill for the class reunion tonight, and such a luxurious hotel would undoubtedly cost a tidy sum. She didn't want to spend that much, finding it a waste. Only after Jared persuaded or otherwise did she agree to go. Subsequently, the two of them drove straight to Glamour Hotel in a second-hand Ford. As soon as they arrived at the entrance of Glamour Hotel, they were greeted by the sight of Yolanda waiting anxiously at the door. Surprise flooded Yolanda when she caught sight of Jared. She thought that he would definitely have been beaten to death after having offended the Crimson Dragon gang the previous night, or at the least, had his head bashed in. But looking at him right then, there actually wasn't a single scratch on him. Were you not beaten up last night? She questioned suspiciously. Didn't I tell you that the Crimson Dragon gang is afraid of me? They wouldn't possibly dare make a move against me. Jared flashed her a smile. What a boast. Yolanda rolled her eyes, not believing him in the least. How could a big gang like the Crimson Dragon gang be afraid of him? He must have used some other method to settle the matter. Perhaps he paid them off. Believe whatever you want. Jared didn't bother explaining further. It's Hilda's class reunion today. Yet you came here in a Ford. Even hailing a taxi would have been better than driving a crappy Ford. Look at the parking lot here. Is there any car as shabby as yours? Yolanda berated with a chagrined expression. Back then, when he encouraged her to attend the class reunion, I thought he was going to figure out a way to give her bragging rights. But isn't he making her a laughingstock now by driving a Ford here? What's wrong with driving a Ford? We've got to support local brands. Jared wasn't the least bit bothered. I think this car is pretty good too. It's far more comfortable than taking the bus. All right, let's hurry up and go in. Hilda hastily chimed in. Since she had said as much, Yolanda stopped dressing Jared down. The three of them then entered the hotel together. A dozen men and women were already seated in an opulent private room. They were chatting and laughing, so the atmosphere was very much lively. One of the men was particularly eye-catching, with his hair parted to the side and a gold watch adorning his wrist. He was seemingly the center of attention, with everyone fawning all over him. That man was Lincoln Palmer, Hilda's ex-boyfriend. Despite having been of a different class than them all, he was attending the class reunion as Michelle Henderson's boyfriend. You're so lucky to have such a great boyfriend, Michigan. Lincoln used to be the campus hunk back then. Here. He was already well respected in school back when I first joined, and I even had a crush on him once upon a time. Look at the watch he's wearing. It probably cost a couple $100,000. He's truly the epitome of a successful person. Furthermore, he has his own company now. How incredible. They all praised Lincoln and Michelle to the skies, inflating their egos to epic proportions. Nah, I've got to work as well. I'm not all that successful. Besides, this watch isn't that valuable either. I asked a friend to get it for me from Sumanthova, and it was only a little over 300 grand. Despite his seemingly modest words, his tone made it crystal clear that he was showing off. In truth, everyone could tell that he was bragging, but no one dared to point it out. They merely listened as he tooted his own horn. Oh my God, 300 grand. I've got to work hard for 10 years to afford a watch like Lincoln's. Comparisons are odious. We can't possibly compare. Lincoln has both looks and riches. This kind of man is truly perfect. When are you going to break up with him, Michigan? I want to book him in advance. I'm even content with being his girlfriend for a day. They all sang Lincoln and Michelle's praises, while also teasing them, causing them both to burst out laughing. This feeling of being envied is truly great. I remember that you used to date Hilda in the past, Lincoln. Why did you two break up? A long-haired girl in a dress asked out of the blue. That girl was Yvonne White, and she was from the same dorm as Hilda back then, so she knew some things about Hilda and Lincoln. Following that question, everyone abruptly went silent, and the atmosphere became awkward. After all, Hilda and Michelle were roommates from the same dorm, so it was rather despicable of the latter to have somewhat stolen the former's boyfriend. At that turn of events, Lincoln suddenly put on a sorrowful expression and feigned hesitance as he murmured, "It's a long story, and it's also something I'm most reluctant to bring up. I gave Hilda my heart, yet she wasn't satisfied at all. Besides her penchant for lavish spending, she also loved to frequent bars. In the end, she even became an exotic dancer. I really couldn't take it anymore." His story was so moving that everyone looked at him with sympathy in their eyes. It seemed that Lincoln still kept up with news of Hilda, for he even knew that she became an exotic dancer. I never thought that she'd be such a person. She looked all sweet and docile back then, but she actually became an exotic dancer at a bar. We can never judge a book by its cover. She looked innocent and pure, but she turned out to be such a promiscuous woman. I really pity Lincoln. He's such a great guy and was so good to her back then, yet she just didn't appreciate him. I heard that she'll also be attending the class reunion today. I really don't understand where she got the courage to do so. It isn't worth it to grieve over such a woman, Lincoln. You and Michigan make a good match now. Everyone condemned Hilda while consoling Lincoln. With tears shimmering in his eyes, Lincoln nodded lightly. It's fortunate that I met Michigan now. She's a balm to my wounded heart. Undeniably, Lincoln's acting skills were superb. In the blink of an eye, he managed to get everyone on his side. Everyone then heaped the blame on Hilda. At that moment, Hilda still hadn't any idea that she had already become the target of public criticism before she had even arrived. I've known Hilda for 3 years, and I didn't even know that she's such a person. No wonder she got herself an ex-convict for a boyfriend now. Yvonne curled her lips. The instant her words fell, everyone was astounded. They all gaped at her incredulously. "Who told you that, Yvonne? Are you sure about that?" Michelle hurriedly inquired. "I heard it from Yolanda. We spoke on the phone last night, and she told me that Hilda has an ex-convict for a boyfriend. I was also surprised at that time, but knowing that she's an exotic dancer now, I think she's lucky enough to bag him," Yvonne answered. A smile bloomed on Michelle's face when she heard that. She then cooked up a plan to humiliate Hilda if the latter happened to bring her boyfriend along. Meanwhile, the corners of Lincoln's mouth turned up after he learned that Hilda had an ex-convict for a boyfriend. At just that moment, Yolanda and Hilda arrived. They pushed open the door and sashayed in, with Jared following closely behind them. "Hello, everyone. It's been a long time," Yolanda greeted as she stepped into the room. "Hello, everyone." Hilda likewise greeted everyone with a smile. But the second she spotted Lincoln, she averted her gaze and dared not look him in the eye. She was afraid that she would snap and tear into him, since he had brought unspeakable misery upon her. However, she didn't want to ruin the class reunion with her personal grudge. Conversely, everyone was all the more convinced of Lincoln's sob story when they noticed her reluctance to look at the man. They were dead certain that she had done something wrong by him, which was why she was acting in such a shifty manner. After Yolanda and Hilda greeted everyone, they were both bewildered upon noticing the strange looks directed the latter's way. "I never expected you to be such a person, Hilda. Yet, you still dare to attend our class reunion. I really made the wrong call about you," Yvonne snapped at Hilda. Hearing that, Hilda was utterly baffled, for she couldn't understand what exactly Yvonne was referring to. "How did she offend you, that you're saying such a thing?" When meeting for the first time after years, Yolanda stepped forward and demanded. Just when Yvonne was about to speak, Lincoln stood up. "All right, let's not speak of the past anymore. We're here to chat and drink, so let's all stay amicable." Only after he said that did Yvonne zip her mouth shut. How ridiculous. Yolanda dragged Hilda to an empty seat and sat down. Jared, on the other hand, unceremoniously sat down next to Hilda. At the sight of him, everyone looked him up and down, their gazes brimming with scorn and derision. "Who is this man, Hilda? This is our class reunion, so isn't it a tad inappropriate to bring an outsider?" Michelle asked Hilda, breaking the silence. She was asking that intentionally, as she wanted to see how Hilda would answer. At that question, Hilda glanced at Jared. She opened her mouth, but she didn't know how she should introduce him. "I can't say that he's my boyfriend since we haven't confirmed our relationship, but if I were to say that he's my friend, then it'd really appear a bit inappropriate to have brought a mere friend to an event, such as a class reunion. Nice to meet you all. I'm Hilda's boyfriend, Jared Chance." Jared climbed to his feet and graciously introduced himself. When Hilda heard that, delight immediately showed on her face. She nodded at Michelle and echoed, "This is my boyfriend." Michelle proceeded to study Jared for some time before she questioned with a shadow of contempt in her eyes, "What's his profession?" "We're working as sales representatives," Hilda replied honestly. "A sales representative? In that case, he probably gets quite a lot in commission." "Huh. I heard that being a sales representative is quite a lucrative job nowadays," Michelle continued. It was as though she wanted to know everything about Jared. I'm not sure either. We just started working there a few days ago," Hilda answered expressionlessly, not at all in the mood to entertain her. However, Michelle grew increasingly smug the more Hilda wanted to end that line of inquiry. Relentless, she asked further, "What did your boyfriend do before he became a sales representative?" Her goal was none other than to force Hilda to speak of Jared's stint in prison, in a bid to humiliate her. This time, Hilda said nothing because she didn't know how to answer that. After all, Jared had just gotten out of prison. But she couldn't speak the truth. If she did, not only would she be ridiculed, but Jared would also be humiliated. "Why are you hesitant to answer that? We're all former classmates, so there's no reason to be embarrassed. If your boyfriend's work isn't going well, we can recommend him some other jobs. But before we do so, we've got to understand him first." No. Despite her seemingly honeyed words, it was clear as day that she wasn't planning to recommend Jared a job. Instead, She wanted Hilda to make a fool of herself. Are you interviewing him now, Michelle? Stop with all the questions, and let's have dinner instead. Yolanda hastily said to Michelle to save Hilda from the embarrassment. Alas, Michelle remained persistent. Staring at Hilda, who wore a conflicted expression, she continued asking, Hilda, is your boyfriend's former profession a secret? Is it something you can't say, such as him having been to prison? This time, she made things clear without beating around the bush any longer. When Hilda heard that, surprise promptly crept into her features. I've never told anyone about that. How could she possibly know about it? She then shifted her gaze to Yolanda, as the latter had just learned that Jared had been to prison last night. Yolanda, too, had surprise etched on her face. In the end, she swung her eyes to Yvonne with fury blazing in them. Was it you who spouted that nonsense, Yvonne? I told her about it last night, and Michelle now knows about it. So it must have been her who spilled the beans. How is that spouting nonsense, Yolanda? I was just stating the facts. Yvonne didn't bother making excuses, but admitted to it right away. That had Yolanda hopping mad, but she was also worried at the same time, since Yvonne was also aware of her being an escort. If she were to let the cat out of the bag now, I'm never going to be able to hold my head up in public. Afraid that Yvonne would also blab about her if angered, she didn't comment further. It's nothing embarrassing that your boyfriend had been to prison, Hilda. Why were you unwilling to tell us about it? We won't discriminate against him. Your current status makes you a perfect match with him. One is an exotic dancer, while the other is an ex-convict. That's a match made in heaven. Ha ha. After Michelle said that, everyone burst into raucous laughter, the undisguised scorn in their eyes shining brightly. Hilda's face flushed bright red. She hadn't wanted to come in the first place because she knew that she'd definitely be treated with contempt if she attended the class reunion. Now that things had come to that, she hadn't the courage to stay anymore. Hilda stood up to leave, but Jared grabbed her arm. Why are you leaving when we haven't even eaten, Hilda? Let's eat first. Exactly. Why are you getting all up in arms when I was just joking with you? Look at how open-minded your boyfriend is. This is Glamour Hotel, you know. If it weren't for this class reunion, I'm afraid that you wouldn't be able to afford dining here, even if you worked for your entire life. If you're worried that you can't afford to pay your share, just say the word. 80 or 100,000 is nothing to me, Michelle proclaimed with a mocking expression on her face. Since she had said as much, Hilda could no longer leave. If I stalk off now, it'll only prove that I'm taking off because I'm worried about spending money. No, it's okay. We have that much at least, Jared chimed in smilingly. All right, then. I won't worry anymore since you've got money. I was really afraid that someone would run off without paying after the meal later. If that were to happen, it'd be wholly embarrassing. Michelle exclaimed before turning to Lincoln. Lincoln, didn't you say that you ordered beforehand? Have them serve the food, then. With a smirk, Lincoln replied, sure. This time, I decided on a feast worth 58,800 exclusive of drinks. I brought my own Sauvignon Blanc, so we'll be spending around 8 to 10,000 per person. I'll have them serve the food right away. After saying that, he made a call. In no time, the private room door was pushed open, and the server brought in exquisite dishes, one after another. However, none of the people in the room showed a hint of joy at the table full of food. After all, they had all just started working, and many of them hadn't any savings. Thus, having a meal that cost 8 to 10,000 was distressing, since they hadn't that much money. As Lincoln clocked everyone's expressions, his lips curved into a barely perceptible arc. Although this meal today isn't that expensive, I know many of you are rather strapped for cash now. As long as you toast me, I'll foot the bill for you. After he had finished saying that, he shifted his gaze to Hilda and Lincoln, making it abundantly clear that his words were meant for them. Wow, thank you, Lincoln. Let me be the first person to toast you. No sooner had his words rang out than someone picked up his wine glass and toasted the man. Soon, everyone toasted him with toady grins on their faces. In the end, Hilda, Jared, and Yolanda were the only ones who hadn't done so. Aren't you going to toast Lincoln, Yolanda? Yvonne queried. I can afford to pay 8,000. Yolanda's meaning was more than clear. She would rather pay out of her own pocket than toast Lincoln. Stop acting as though you're rich. How many clients would you have to sleep with before you make that much? I was just saying that for your own good. Yet you're not the least bit grateful. Yvonne grumbled with a roll of her eyes. That remark was akin to a bolt of thunder that struck without warning, and everyone cut their gazes at Yolanda. Meanwhile, Yolanda's face flushed bright red, and she felt so mortified at their gazes that she wanted to crawl into a hole. What nonsense are you spouting, Yvonne? I'll kill you. Yolanda sprang to her feet with a bottle of wine in her hand. Watch your tongue, Yolanda. I'm not spouting nonsense. Do you not know your own profession? Yvonne wasn't willing to back down either. Holding the wine bottle in hand, Yolanda trembled all over. In the next instant, she made to hurl it at Yvonne. Right then, stark regret swamped her. I regarded her as a close friend, yet she betrayed me. At that precise moment, Michelle stood up and snatched the wine bottle from Yolanda. With a cold expression on her face, she roared, "Why are you two making a scene? I was the one who arranged the class reunion today. Are you two going against me to kick up a fuss here? If that's the case, just get out of here." She had appointed herself as the host just because Lincoln was her boyfriend. Anyhow, Yvonne didn't dare say anything further following that bellow. Yolanda, on the other hand, sat back down with tears swimming in her eyes. The rest of the people eyed her licentiously, especially the males. She was rather pleasing to the eyes, after all, and they could possibly better than for just a few hundred. After that incident, Yolanda kept her head lowered and uttered nary a word. Come on, let's all eat together. You guys don't get to eat such good food usually, Michelle said to the crowd, ignoring Yolanda altogether. Subsequently, everyone started eating enthusiastically. No one bothered about Yolanda other than Hilda, who consoled her tirelessly. But still, Yolanda kept mum. They all drank and toasted each other, but Jared merely concentrated on eating. No one cared about him, so he likewise ignored them all. Staring at him, Lincoln lifted his wine glass and remarked, "Why are you just eating and not drinking, Jared? Are you trying to eat your money's worth? Don't make yourself sick by stuffing yourself." Ha ha. As his words fell, everyone hooted with laughter. Jared wiped his mouth with a tissue and replied without a hint of anger, "This wine is too cheap. I'm not used to drinking such lousy wines." Upon hearing that, everyone was startled. This is Sauvignon Blanc, a wine that costs a few thousand a bottle, yet he's claiming that he's not used to drinking it. What would you like to drink if you're not used to drinking Sauvignon Blanc? This is free, but you'll have to pay if you choose something else, Lincoln sneered. Money is no matter. The thing is, I'll get into a coughing fit if I drink wine. That's too cheap, Jared explained placidly. Whoa. Listen to his bragging. I've never heard of anyone having a coughing fit after drinking cheap wine. Why are you acting all high and mighty when you're merely an ex-convict? You've probably never even drank Sauvignon Blanc. I really can't stand listening to him anymore. It's hurting my ears. When the crowd heard Jared's comment, they all went into an uproar. Michelle snickered disdainfully before saying to Hilda, "Look at your boyfriend, Hilda. What a weirdo. Never mind if he's poor, but he's acting as though he's rich." Hilda ignored her, though she, too, didn't quite understand what was going on with Jared that day. "Jared, if my eyes serve me right, you drive a Ford, right? These few bottles of wine might even be enough to buy your car. Why are you still keeping up the charade?" Lincoln questioned with a smirk. It wasn't until after hearing his remark did the others notice a Ford car key at Jared's waistband. "I'm just supportive of local products. I've got a Bentley, but I don't like to drive it," Jared clarified mildly. "I can drive Tommy's Bentley anytime. Besides, the entire Templar regiment is mine, let alone a car." PFFT. Lincoln had just taken a sip of water when he spurted it out after hearing that. Ha ha ha. In all my years, I've never seen someone so calm and unruffled while blowing his own trumpet. You're something else. You've got a Bentley. I bet you've never even seen one, have you? Lincoln doubled over in laughter, laughing so hard that he was snorting. Everyone else guffawed as well, convulsing with laughter. Some even laughed so hard that tears trickled out of their eyes. "I'm nothing compared to you. I've never seen someone who can still be so calm and unruffled, even feigning generosity by offering to treat everyone to a meal after swindling a woman. Jared countered with a cold chuckle. The smile on Lincoln's face vanished at once, to be replaced by a grim expression the instant he heard that. "What are you talking about? I don't get it," he demanded, his eyes narrowing into slits. "You're well aware of what I'm talking about. After all, you know better than me whether you swindled anyone." Jared likewise stared him in the eye without giving him any quarter. Their gazes locked, and the atmosphere in the private room turned tense. What a load of crap. Lincoln's watch alone costs a few $100,000. How could he possibly swindle anyone? Michelle bellowed at Jared. In her eyes, Lincoln was an ideal man with talent and wealth. Thus, it made no sense that such a wealthy person would con someone else. Exactly. I'm afraid you can't afford his watch even if you were to clean out your savings. Stop slandering him, Yvonne seconded. It was evident that no one believed Jared's claim that Lincoln would swindle someone. What's so great when it's just an imitation watch? Jared snorted. Ever since he stepped into the room, he had realized that the watch was fake. He only needed to release some spiritual energy to know whether it was genuine. An imitation watch. Everyone swung their gazes at Lincoln. Even Hilda, who had been comforting Yolanda, couldn't help glancing at the gold watch on the man's wrist. A flash of panic flickered across Lincoln's face. He then went ballistic and snarled, "Nonsense. I got this watch from Sumanthova. Have you ever seen a gold watch? How dare you insist that it's an imitation?" Jared, it's fine if you envy Lincoln, but how could you say that his watch is an imitation? It's just worth a few $100,000, isn't it? He has plenty of money, so why would he wear something fake? He drives a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Don't tell me you're going to say that his car is also a knockoff. Michelle challenged Jared. Considering his status, how could he possibly wear an imitation watch? I'd heard that he's loaded back when we were studying. As such, he can't possibly wear a knockoff. I pity you. But you should also work hard to make something of yourself. You can't simply say that someone else is wearing an imitation just because you don't have it. What kind of mentality is that? Following Michelle's remark, everyone started condemning Jared. Yvonne shot Jared a glare and snapped, "You're saying that the watch is a knockoff without even looking at it. It's glaringly obvious that you're jealous. Are you feeling resentful that your girlfriend's ex-boyfriend is doing better than you?" "I'm just stating the facts." Jared flashed her a faint smile. In response, Yvonne harumphed, "Pa, this is plain jealousy. If it's true, do come up with proof." Seeing so many people speaking up for him, Lincoln asserted with a frosty expression, "We've just made each other's acquaintance today. So why are you targeting me, Jared? If you don't give me an explanation for this matter, mark my words that I'm going to have you brought out of here on a stretcher." However, Jared merely sneered. "Okay, you know better than anyone whether the watch is an imitation. Since you want to be humiliated, don't blame me for granting you your wish." While saying that, he stood up and ordered, "Give me your watch. I'll prove it to you all." Instead of giving the man his watch, Lincoln withdrew his hand and demanded warily, "How are you planning to prove it? This watch of mine cost a few $100,000. Can you afford to replace it if you were to damage it?" He would never hand it over, for he knew that it was a knockoff. In truth, he was merely creating an illusion of being a wealthy man. That's simple. "We'll know whether it's an imitation after smashing it to the ground," Jarrett answered nonchalantly. As long as the gold watch shattered, one could instantly tell whether it was the real deal. The mechanisms in an authentic gold watch were made of gold, but a knockoff couldn't possibly imitate that as well. "You want to shatter my watch? This watch cost a few $100,000, Jared. Can why? You afford to pay me back after ruining it?" Lincoln questioned guiltily upon hearing that. He couldn't allow the man to shatter the watch since it was an imitation, and that would be clear as day once smashed. "Exactly. Can you afford to pay for it? You dare smash a watch worth a few $100,000. What kind of authentication method is this? Don't boast if you don't have that capability. And here I thought that you really knew how to verify whether it's real." Everyone started criticizing Jared and heaping scorn on him. Smiling, Jared stated, There are still other methods to decipher whether it's the real deal, even without smashing it. Gold is different from other metals, so the answer will be evident as long as we weigh the watch and compare its weight with the figure stated on the official website. No matter how good an imitation was, the weight couldn't be the same. After all, gold weighed differently from other metals. When the others heard that, they found it to be a feasible method, as it also wouldn't ruin the watch. And I'm supposed to just do as you say. A glimmer of panic flitted across Lincoln's eyes. He would never agree to weigh it, knowing that it would only prove the watch to be a knockoff. Jared, you're jealous of Lincoln and claim that his watch is an imitation. But what if it's not? There's no reason for him to listen to you just because of a baseless remark. Michelle demanded with her eyes fixed on Jared. If the watch is genuine, I'll pay for this meal, Jared declared confidently. He had full confidence that the watch was a knockoff. Hearing that, everyone turned to Lincoln. Just let him weigh it, Lincoln. Since he dared make such a bold statement, prove him wrong once and for all. Besides, we'll also be getting a free meal out of it. By then, Lincoln was a smidge panicked, and cold sweat started beating on his forehead. Never had he expected Jared to fixate on his watch. This watch requires a precise weighing instrument, but we don't have it now. How do you want to weigh it? Don't tell me you can tell by just weighing it in your hand, Lincoln questioned. All right, I'll admit that you're right in that we don't have a weighing instrument now. However, do you dare give your watch to me for a look? I'll only take a look at it, Jared drawled with a smirk. What are you planning to do? Are you going to smash it? Lincoln asked warily. No, I definitely won't do that. If I damage it even one bit, I'll pay you back according to the original price, regardless of whether this watch of yours is genuine. Jared shook his head. He didn't need to smash the watch, and he was merely teasing the man when he said he was going to shatter it to tell whether it was genuine. Fine, I don't mind giving it to you for a look. Lincoln was afraid that Jared would continue insisting that the watch was a knockoff if he refused to give it to him for a look, so he took it off and handed it to the man. Then, he asserted, many people are standing witness for me here. If you smash it, you've got to compensate me according to the original price. With that said, he was convinced that Jared wouldn't dare smash it anymore. Without being weighed, it was also impossible to tell the authenticity of the gold watch. After all, it was a top-notch imitation, and only an expert appraiser could tell whether it was genuine at a single glance. He didn't believe that Jared could discern that. Jared took the watch from him. After fiddling with it for a while, he handed it back to the man. That's it. You can tell whether it's the real deal with just a look. Lincoln regarded him with puzzlement written all over his face even as he took his watch back. Yes, I only needed to take a single look. Jared nodded firmly. HMPH. How ridiculous. Snorting, Lincoln slipped his watch back onto his wrist. Just as everyone was waiting for Jared to come up with the proof, Michelle abruptly shrieked. Lincoln, cue quick. Look at your watch. Startled, Lincoln hastily swung his gaze to his watch, only to be wholly stumped. All the others were perplexed and shifted their gazes to the man's watch as well. At a single look, they were all similarly floored. The gold watch on Lincoln's hand had long since lost its golden luster earlier, and had turned into a coppery color, making it all too clear that it was discoloring. With that, they could all tell that it was unquestionably an imitation, since authentic gold wouldn't discolor. They all stared at Lincoln with a peculiar look in their eyes. The atmosphere also became exceedingly awkward. That imitation watch is so inferior that my hand is all covered in gold powder. Jared snagged a piece of wet tissue and wiped his hand, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. Lincoln's expression turned exceedingly grim, becoming as black as thunder. Beside him, Michelle gaped at him in shock, at a loss for words. Lincoln, who had initially acted high and mighty with an arrogant aura, felt his face flaming hotly right then. He didn't even dare look anyone in the eye. Lincoln, could it be that you were duped by that friend of yours? How could he get you a knockoff from Sumanthova? Someone couldn't help asking. That reminded Lincoln of a possible excuse, and jubilance immediately inundated him. He lifted his head and snarled, "That damn fellow must have duped me. I spent a few $100,000. yet he dared to buy me an imitation watch. I'll definitely kill him when I catch him." While saying that, he smashed the watch in his hand to the ground, shattering it into smithereens. However, the trust earlier was already gone from some of the people's eyes as they looked at the man. After all, it was clear as day that he was using an imitation watch to show off. That swindler is truly despicable. It's just a 300 grand watch. No, Lincoln certainly won't lie about that when he's driving a car that costs over $1 million. Why would he still need to buy a knockoff to put on a show? Michelle stood up beside Lincoln and defended him. Seizing that opportunity, Lincoln took out his car key and placed it on the table to flaunt his status. Who knows whether he rented the car? Jared chimed in with a sneer right then. In fact, many people there shared his sentiments. After all, Lincoln's watch was an imitation, so there was a possibility that the Mercedes-Benz was also rented. Besides, a day's fee didn't cost that much. Nonsense. How could it possibly be a rental? I've seen him driving it long before today, not just for tonight. Michelle retorted. The answer will be evident once he shows us the car ownership certificate, Jared countered. As long as Lincoln produced the car ownership certificate, there would be no doubt about the name on it at a single glance. Michelle turned to Lincoln, seemingly wanting him to retrieve the car ownership certificate to shut Jared up. Seeing that, Lincoln hurriedly declared, "It's too troublesome to go to the car and retrieve it. You just want to see whether I've got that capability. No, I'll order a new watch online right away. I find myself feeling uneasy without a watch."